Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashaliva, along with co-hosts Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherry. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you very much, Anara. I am very glad and honored to introduce Dr. Pär Gustafsson Kurki, who joins us from Sweden. Dr. Kurki is working for Swedish Defence Research Agency, and his presentation at our 182nd weekly meeting is titled Putin's Warrior Priests, God, Guns and Propaganda. It is based on recent research, in particular a forthcoming article in Europe-Asia Studies. Thank you, Dr. Kurki. Microphone is yours, and I will open your presentation to share.
Okay, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I thought I would say a few words about the organization I'm working for, and it's the Swedish Defence Research Agency. We are a government research institute, part of Swedish civil service, and about more than 1,500 researchers work for the agency. Most of them are engineers, technical people. I belong to the Division of Defense Analysis, which is a smaller segment of maybe 300 people working in different departments and different units on a very number of different topics and disciplines. And I'm in the security policy, Eurasian security policy unit. We have a team of approximately 12 full-time researchers in the Russia team. All of us speak Russian fluently, and some of us have lived in Russia previously in the past, so to speak. And we do research for the Swedish Ministry of Defense. Our main task is to assess Russian military capability and security policy in a broad perspective. And that's where my research about the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russian militarism comes into the picture. Today's presentation, Putin's warrior priests, concerns the military clergy and is based on some sources. I will show you what sources I based this presentation on in a minute. Could you change the next slide, please? Yes, the presentation is based on primarily the paper the article that is due in Europe-Asia Studies next year, called Putin's Military Clergy, Organization, Work, Task, Purpose, and Propaganda. I also used some material from another recent FOI report, Putin's Patriotic Agenda at War, and also some other sources. But mainly this Europe-Asia Studies paper, which you can find a preprint if you want to read the entire paper, see what's there. You can find it at Source Archive. Next slide, please. Yes. Actually, I should start by backtracking a little bit. The first slide showed the Troitsa icon. You might remember to the left in the picture. And the reason why I show it, exactly, thank you very much. The reason why I show it is that it illustrates, or the fate of this icon illustrates, the recent fate of this icon illustrates well the role of orthodoxy in today's Russia, in Putin's Russia, and also the level of actual some irrationality that comes into play when they try to adhere to orthodox principles and so on, because this icon had been stored in the Tretyakov gallery for many years, believe since 1929 at least. But the other year, not very long ago, it was moved from the gallery, where it was protected in a perfect humidity and controlled environment, to a much less controlled, unstable environment in the Christ Savior Cathedral, so to speak. And this was a purely political move, a decision made by the top Kremlin leader, Vladimir Putin, and basically illustrates the weight of this symbol for the regime and for the Russian Orthodox Church today. And they were willing to do this move in the middle of a war to bolster the church, despite the advice of many experts that said that it risks the integrity of the icon to move it into a less protected environment, where it might be too humid or fluctuating humidity that could damage this treasure of Russian culture, Russian art history, so to speak. So it was an irrational move, but for symbolic reasons, for ideological reasons, it was conducted. So that's illustrates the meaning, the importance of today's topic. So please move forward with the slides, please. Thank you. So the presentation today consists of basically 5 points. I will first say some things about the conventional role of military chaplains in armed forces worldwide, and then I will talk about the Putin's military clergy's role in Russia today, what they actually are doing, the functions they fulfill. And then I will discuss and describe how they got where they are today, so to speak. Then I will move to the next point I'm making about the message that they convey to the troops, because the military clergy is, of course, a part of the state structure of the armed forces, Russian armed forces, while being canonically supervised by the diocese of the church. They belong to the Ministry of Defense, so they are paid by the Ministry of Defense and so on. So they have a specific role of producing a particular message to the troops, and I will discuss what that theological and pseudo-theological message is. And then finally, I will say something about the future outlook of the military clergy and what it means in Russia today. So I think next slide, please. So the two key points I'm making today, that the two major things I want you to bring with you from today's presentation is that the military clergy is an important part of the current system in Russia. And since it is integral to both the military and the Russian Orthodox Church, it's important to note that the church is a main source of the so-called traditional values, which are a key element in the Kremlin's public narrative about itself, the emerging state ideology in today's Russia. So that's the first point, that the clergy is an important part of the Putin system. And the second part is more specific in that it says the military clergy promulgates the Russian executive's militaristic propaganda based on the false doctrine of Ruski Mir, the Russian world, and they convey this message to the troops at the front line, and also basically to the rest of the population, but they are primarily their first task is to direct this message to the troops. So that's the two main points I want to convey today. And the next slide, please. I thought it might be instructive to begin with sort of a macro picture of the situation, the religious landscape in Russia, just to get a feel for what the military clergy can and cannot do very well, and also the receptiveness of spiritual militaristic propaganda in the Russian population and also in the armed forces. And to the left, and this data, both these diagrams, charts, they comes from a report called Apostles of Violence, which the paper I mentioned from European Studies is partly based on this report and partly on entirely new research. And these graphs you can find in this report if you want to download it from foi.se if you're interested. And to the left we have a very interesting graph about self-reported belief systems in the Soviet Union and Russia from 1989 to 2022. And there you can see very, very clearly that in the last years of the Soviet Union, the majority, maybe 70% of the population, claimed that they were atheists, that they held atheist views and beliefs, while a smaller number of proportion of people, maybe 25-30%, reported that they were Orthodox, had an Orthodox outlook on life. Maybe not deeply religious, but at least a cultural Orthodox type of identity. And this situation was completely reversed in the 1990s, when the number of atheists, the proportion of atheists decreased dramatically. And from 2003, it has been on a very low level, according to this data. And the number of the proportion of those who self-report that they hold Orthodox. They have an Orthodox identity, an Orthodox belief system, has increased and stayed stable on a high level. Maybe 70-80% of the population still today are at least culturally Orthodox. So how many of these are deeply religious? Well, if you look at the graph to the right, you see the percentage of Russians attending church with some regularity in the years 2003 to 2022. And the average percentage of per year that attend church with some church service with some regularity is about 12%, 10 to 12%, and that's fairly stable over a 20-year period. So basically, that means that it signals that it's a sign of a minority of deeply religious people who are actually acting on their beliefs and going to church regularly with some regularity and so on, while the majority are culturally orthodox, maybe adhere to Christmas and celebrate Easter, but not attend church services on a regular basis. So basically the point I'm making is that there is a receptiveness to the theological message, the spiritual militaristic propaganda that is promulgated by the military clergy, given the fact that available data also suggests that the religiosity in the religiousness in the armed forces are similar, the proportions are similar to the general population. Roughly 10% are deeply religious and maybe 80%, 70-80% are culturally orthodox. So there's a receptiveness to this type of propaganda that goes beyond those who are deeply religious. Next slide, please. So what is the role of military chaplains or military priests? They have sometimes various names. Military chaplains is what they tend to be called in Western countries and Anglo-Saxon countries. But sometimes military priests, they're called, and a colloquial Russian word for it is kapellan, which comes from chaplain, but also voennoe svященник, military priests. So what do they do? These military chaplains or military priests, what is their conventional role? Basically, they do three things. They have an instrumental role of boosting the morale of soldiers. And in the United States, which has a very well developed system of military chaplains, they are very outspoken about their purpose, that they are considered as a force multiplier, a very instrumental way of using religion and spirituality to boost military effectiveness. And that is the traditional approach that has been the model that has been applied in most countries, even also my own country, Sweden, at least until the 1940s. But then we have had since we have been at peace for such a long time, the focus on military effectiveness become less. At least some people, Swedish researchers have argued that the focus on military effectiveness became less pronounced, but that's kind of another story. And then the second point is that they do pastoral care. And basically what that means is that they take care of the soldiers in the sense that they hold, they talk to them and give them some comfort and basically ameliorating combat stress, which could lower the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, for instance, in soldiers. They do follow. They tend to have a genuine service to the military community and to the families of soldiers, and this is true in all countries. These points are true in all countries. And this third point is the religious ceremonies, that they hold church services, prayers in the trenches, and so on, advise militaries in religious matters and military commanders on religious matters and so on. So these are the kind of three conventional things that military chaplains do worldwide. Next slide, please. So what are the military priests doing in Russia today? What is their de facto role? I would say that they have a very pronounced role of legitimizing the use of military force. I will dig deeper in a minute in another slide in the actual message that they convey to the troops, the theological and pseudo-theological message that they convey to the troops. But the effect is that they're legitimizing the use of military force. They also legitimize conquest of other countries, and the well-renowned scholar Dima Adamski has called the resurrection of the military clergy in 2009 as the church's greatest achievement in the security realm. So they have for the church, they also have a very important mission of helping the church get integrated in state structures and preserving its and extending its reach and power. We might also note that the church was resurrected itself. The Moscow Patriarchate was resurrected by Stalin in 1943 after being suppressed violently for decades after the October Revolution in 1917. And the reason for resurrecting the church was, of course, very instrumental. He wanted to have a church that was compliant with the Soviet state and helped to boost morale in the population in the midst of the German invasion that started in 1941. But today, this is the role of the clergy today, to legitimize the use of military force and legitimize conquest, basically. The main points, at least. So, next slide, please. So, how did they get where they are today? What is the historical background to their path to today's situation where they are legitimizing conquest, basically? Well, I will just say a few words about this timeline. The military clergy had its apex in the years of the First World War. They had more organizational resources during this Tsarist era, during the last years of the Tsarist era than any time before. They had more than 3,000 military priests, chaplains on the front line, but this didn't help the situation. They were not a factor that determined the fate of the armed forces. They couldn't stop the deteriorating morale and so on, and the collapse of the Russian front. And when the Bolsheviks took power, they very quickly, in January 1918, they decided to abolish the entire structure, the entire organization of military chaplains, and most of them went to the Whites side, the White Army, to fight against the Red, and some were, of course, imprisoned and killed also. Then we take a very big jump across the Soviet era to 1993, 2 years after the collapse of the dissolution of the Soviet system. And in 1993, the first official meeting between the church and the Ministry of Defense was held. And basically what happened in the early 90s was very specifically, very concretely, that the church went to the militaries, to the Kremlin in a big meeting with militaries, the top brass, and basically told them that, look, we have a rich cultural history. We have all our churches, we have the Orthodox faith, and so on. We can offer us as a reliable social political ally to the armed forces and to the state. And since the state just had the Soviet state had dissolved, and the Russian state didn't have a identity anymore, It was a very, I think the slide went a little bit too quickly to the next. Can we back one step, please? Oh, thank you. You basically, they offered their services, and since there was a void, a lack of the Soviet identity was gone, the militaries were welcoming the church and started to cooperate. And in 1994, there was the first joint agreement. In 1995, the church created a special directorate for cooperation with law enforcement and armed forces. And in 1996, it was deepened further with an agreement of cooperation and the creation of a coordination council. So step by step, the formal structures for cooperation between the church and the armed forces were established. And in 2009, the military clergy was recreated via a decision by the then President Dmitry Medvedev. And in 2014, infrastructure for systematic training was established for the first time in 5 military command colleges across Russia. And in 2015, the first true real combat deployment, the first deployment of the military chaplains were in Syria, of course, and then after that in Ukraine as well. So next slide, please. So what is the message that they convey to the troops? In the paper in European Studies, I go a bit deeper into this this message, and also I write about it in the Apostles of Violence report I mentioned earlier. And basically, the theological justification for killing enemies in battle, I would say, is the way they are constructing it. It's a fairly conventional Christian position. I think that this could be debated by, and some people might have opposing views or criticize this view, but I still maintain that this is the least remarkable part of the message they convey to the troops, because they are not twisting the scripture in any particular way. They just have chosen specific parts of it. And I think that military chaplains in almost any country would be able to understand and use the same type of theological arguments as the military clergy in Russia does. But what becomes problematic is when we look at the doctrine of Ruski Mir, the Russian world, because this is a very devious concept invented basically by or filled with religious meaning by Kirill, who also the patriarch, who deliberately designed this concept to be very flexible and very, very broad, in the sense, very very fuzzy definition. Russian world, or Ruski Mir, is a very simple concept, or a complex argument has been boiled down into a very simple concept that anyone can understand. But it can contain everything from Russian imperialists who are atheists to Russian Orthodox who hold deep religious beliefs. They can both, these extremes can gather under the umbrella of the Ruski Mir ideology, which basically says that the Russian world is much larger than the Russian Federation, and there is a justification for protecting minorities of Russian speakers in various countries, and a theological justification for war adds to the toxicity of the Russian world ideology, because it says in the document from the year 2000, as early as the year 2000. There was a document created also by the now Patriarch Kirill, which is the basis of the social concept, basically the social teachings of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, which says that war is justified if at least one of two conditions are true. And the first is the purpose is to protect neighbors from harm, and the second is that if the purpose is to restore trampled justice. And basically this simple concoction of theology, of justifying killing, the toxic political theology of Ruski Mir, which justifies the idea or the perception that Russia is indeed much larger than the Russian Federation's borders, plus this theological justification of war, basically is the blueprint for expansionist war. It's an expansionist movement from the center towards the periphery in this ideology. Which is very toxic, and of course we all know the atrocities that are committed on a daily basis, and the war that is going on the front line in Ukraine, this defensive war against the Russian invasion, the Russian invasion being the most visible manifestation of the Russian world ideology today. So next slide, please. So what is the future outlook of this? What does all of this mean? I would say that, to put it simply, the military clergy contributes to the further militarization of the church by being a part of the armed forces and adapting and cooperating with the armed forces, and it also furthered the theocratization of the Russian state. So there's a dual tendency there, I would say. And also very important is that it lowers the thresholds for future wars by normalizing war and violence, which basically encourages people in Russia to think that military force is a legitimate way of solving perceived international problems, and that wars of aggression are actually acceptable, although all international law says the opposite. So that's all. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for listening. I think I will end there, and if there are any questions, I would be happy to discuss the material I have talked about today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gustafsson. And this is great material, and I'm sure we have time for many questions. Please, anyone to start the discussion? I will keep my own because I'm probably quite familiar with the topic. Dr. Deutsch, please.
Hi. Would you say a little bit about the schism between the Russian and the Ukrainian churches, and then go on to talk about the role of the Ukrainian church in terms of its interaction with the military?
Yes. It has been, I can say something about your first question, and the second I know not much about, actually. I haven't much deep insight into the Ukrainian side. I have colleagues who are working on this topic. We are actually creating an entirely new research group for the studies of Ukraine. So that will be something that we will look into. What I can say about the schism is that it's a very sensitive topic for the Russian Orthodox Church, and thus for the Putin regime, that they are not as welcome in the Ukrainian space as they would they had hoped, so to speak. I think that, as I mentioned, a part of this Russian world ideology is that there is a center that is based on the Moscow central power, so to speak, is based on the idea of traditional values. And those values are, so to speak, according to this ideology, this false doctrine, this pseudo-theology, is the values are supposed to be rolled out from the center to the periphery. So the fact that they are met with resistance by the Ukrainian state, even in the sphere of religion, is very difficult for them to accept, apart from, of course, the obvious kinetic side of the war and so on. And it also is very contradictory, the contradictions in this ideology, or this situation, because according to the ideology of the Russian world, the doctrine, the Russian world should be united. But at the same time, Russia is waging a war of aggression against one of its supposed members of this Russian world, where the church, the Orthodox faith, should be, according to these views, these rather strange views, are supposed to be the glue that keeps everything together. That being Orthodox is basically being Russian, and Ukrainian nationhood and identity doesn't exist. So those warped views are complicating the situation for the Russian side, because they cannot fit the current situation with what is actually the reality of the ideology with the empirical reality, so to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deutsch. Anara, please.
Thank you very much for your very important and interesting presentation. And I wish in the future we can talk more about spiritual war, about what we can see today across not only Russia, across the whole former Soviet Union. And I think that quite often Russia's invasion presented as a crusade, as a holy war against not only Ukraine, but the corrupt West. And it's very actually familiar. It was common during the Soviet time period. And the church, of course, justifies numerous war crimes, justifies actually all this propaganda. And I have two questions. First, how religious leaders, including Orthodox Christian abroad, across the world, react to this rhetoric of holy war? That's very interesting. And especially in West Virginia, we have also a branch of we have an Orthodox church. So that's very interesting, their reaction to this explanation of the war. And second, how Muslim leaders in Russia, and for instance, Ramzan Kadyrov, support Putin's war. So that's very interesting how everything is twisted today in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great questions. First, I think your first question concerned the reaction of Orthodox religious leaders to this use of the concept of holy war, the holy war, Sveshchennaya Vaina rhetoric of the church, Russian Orthodox Church. Well, I would like to draw attention first to the earlier reaction, very strong negative reaction of the roughly 1,500 people, scholars, theologians, Orthodox priests outside Russia who signed this petition published by Public Orthodox in 2022, basically denouncing the entire doctrine of Russian world, Ruski Mir. And I say that this has only become a more acute situation because the use of the concept you mentioned, the holy war, has become more official since last year, when they published a document stating this definition of the war, that it is a religious holy war, in fact. And I dare to say that Patriarch Kirill, if he, as I believe, had the plan, he hoped to become a respected religious, international religious leader, I think that project has basically crumbled, because basically no one wants to speak to him anymore. So I think that sums up pretty well how the reaction to this concept has been. And then could you remind me what was your second question? I'm sorry.
Second question. Thank you very much for your answer. And then for the first question, the second question is how Muslim leaders in Russia react to the Putin's propaganda, to the church war against Ukraine, and also the third question, how you explain phenomenon of Ramzan Kadyrov. He is a Muslim leader. He is a very strict Muslim. How they justify all these actually atrocities and invasion? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think that Ramzan Kadyrov, of course, is very interesting person in the sense of, or a key person in the Putin regime, because he is instrumental in Putin's project of keeping the Northern Caucasus under the Russian control. I mean, basically, his father was, if I remember correctly, he was actually fighting the Russians in the first Chechen war and maybe the earliest of the early times of the second war even. But he was killed, and his son was basically switched sides and became a protege and a strongman in the area for Putin regime. And I think that is the key to understanding this seemingly contradiction between Orthodoxy and Islam in Russia. The Orthodox Church is basically dominating in all aspects. They are seen as they are always mentioned first, and they have a dominating role according to Russian law, and also the Russian Constitution from 2020 is very clear that the Russian Orthodox Church is the most important, basically a national church since 2020. And then there are traditional religious associations such as the Muslim Association, the Muslims, and they are, of course, they can't be ignored by the regime, but they certainly are not. They are more instrumental in their relation to these other religious associations. So basically, I think that it's power politics. It's a matter of monopoly of force in the Russian, from Moscow's monopoly of force to be extended to Northern Caucasus via Kadyrov, and religion here becomes more of a less important in that sense. There are other concerns that are more important to the regime to try to keep Russia together. But it's interesting to see how the developments will happen, because Kadyrov's health is not very good. It seems there are several repeated reports about him being have various illnesses and so on, and he's getting older, so he won't be around forever, and Putin will also not be around forever. So there are potentially a lot of things that can happen in the religious landscape and political landscape in Russia in the next 10 years, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nara. Any more, please? Comments or questions? Dr. Gustafsson? Yes, August, please open your microphone, please. Your microphone, yes. My microphone is off. Sorry, We don't hear you, August. The microphone.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, now fine.
Thank you. Victor, I apologize for missing your talk. I'll catch it later when Larry puts it up on the web. I have a historical question that I hope isn't too obscure for you. In the late 1860s, Metropolitan Philaret of Moscow entertained the ecumenical relations with the Anglican Church. And he was not alone in doing that. So I wonder what happened to his outreach to the West, especially the Anglicans, over the remainder of the Tsarist era.
Well, that's a very astute observation and a question, but I must admit that I have to pass on that because it's not within my area of knowledge at all. I'm not a historian. I'm a sociologist, so I have different perspective. But thank you very much for your question. It was most interesting.
Okay.
Thank you, August. Any more, please? I have a number of questions here. We have some time, but please, any more observations? Larry, please.
Curious to know what percentage of the Russian Orthodox Church does not agree with the attack on Ukraine?
That's a great, very important question. I think that no one has the quantitative data to give a very precise answer to that. But let me try to make a few observations at least of what might be going on. There's clearly let's say a marriage of convenience between Patriarch Kirill, the Moscow Patriarchate, and the Kremlin, Putin's, and so on. Both sides have reason to need the other, so to speak. And then what is the support of this marriage, so to speak, within the church? What is the support of these policies? Well, given the legal situation in Russia today, which has been stepwise, they have tightened the bolts, nuts and bolts, and tightened the screws in the system incrementally since 2022, especially making it very difficult to voice dissent. And that is, of course, applied to all Russians, but especially perhaps to the clergy, and those who have had expressed different opinions. And for instance, there was this one famous case of a priest that exchanged the word victory in a prayer that he was supposed to deliver to or hold for his parishioners. He exchanged the word victory and replaced it with peace. And for that, he was immediately reported by someone of his own parish members to the authorities and was convicted as basically a heretic and for discrediting the armed forces of Russia, so to speak. And there are many such cases and of different severity of priests that have been defrocked and priests that have had to flee the country or being against their will moved to some distant area of Russia and away from the bigger cities and so on. So and also the FSB is involved. They are not they are very involved in putting pressure on dissident priests and basically knocking on the door and asking them, why are you speaking against our guys in the war? Why are you not supporting like you should do, so to speak. So there are a lot of pressures, both informal, sort of what they call prophylactic conversations with priests by the authorities, and also legal cases against them, those who are advocating for peace or even mildly criticizing the war, and so on. So basically, it's very difficult to be a dissident priest. That's true. That's a fact. But I also believe, I also think there's a case to be made that there are a lot of the priests who are complacent in the sense that they accept the policies of the patriarch, perhaps for instrumental reasons, perhaps because they want to keep their job, but also because quite a few of them also believe in this, because the Russian world ideology and the doctrine of a Russian world is very attractive to many Orthodox believers. That is also a fact. It is not some kind of alien construct that is force-fed into people's mind and souls, but it's actually quite attractive given the way it has been formulated and the way it is promulgated by the church, by the patriarch, and by the military clergy and the Putin also, and so on. So there are I believe there are a lot of priests that also genuinely accept this rather strange theological position and pseudo-theology that basically is the Russian world ideology.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. While people are still thinking, I have a question on my own. Can you please comment on the so-called temple of the military forces, the new church on the outskirts of Moscow, which is also some kind of half-pagan museum, allegedly having as relics military kept by Hitler as a trophy, things like this. Do you know about this issue?
I don't know about the military cap of Hitler, but I know that they have used a lot of material from Nazi tanks from the war, melted them and made the staircase, I think, for the cathedral. And the whole building architecture is of course, it's green as the military color, and there are a lot of numerological sort of magic infused in this structure. I think one of the domes is 19.45 meters wide, symbolizing the end of the victory over Nazi Germany, sort of in 1945, and so on. So yes, I mean, I think that there is a case for believing that this is definitely a sacred place for the sort of emerging political religion in Russia today, which is very militarized, and it is basically this cathedral that you mentioned is basically I think a researcher, now I forgot his name, but he had a very interesting formulation that he called it a cathedral mutual legitimation, because it fuses the armed forces and the state's need for legitimation by the church and the church need for legitimation by the state. So it symbolizes the amalgamation of the church and the state in Russia, and the militarized cult of violence and cult of war as a phenomenon, and cult of the Second World War in particular. I think it's also worth mentioning that they are building if they haven't even finished it, a similar cathedral, or a smaller one, I believe, outside St. Petersburg, which is also supposed to cater to veterans of the special military operation. I think that one, as far as I remember, is more specifically built for the SVO veterans. And you also have a designated temple for the various military districts and so on. So you have a whole infrastructure of churches and cathedrals and temples that fuses the military security sphere with the religious sphere in Russia. And I think the important or interesting question here is actually to ask to what extent is this actually an accepted political religion or accepted ideology by the population. And I think perhaps many are apathetic and don't care, or just comply with like in the Soviet era, learn how to speak in the right way in official situations to signal loyalty towards Putin by being an Orthodox and having connections to the church and so on. But I also am very certain that there are also a lot of people who are genuinely patriotic, genuinely Orthodox, and that they use these places, or worship basically, to boost their own feelings for their motherland, how warped and strange motivations that they might have for this, and how warped the war, the aggressive war against Ukraine actually is. But that might be the case. I think it's an emerging Russian state ideology.
Thank you. I have a question from Leslie here. Leslie, please.
Yes. Since you were talking about the museum incorporating various elements of Nazi items as trophies of the Russian defeat of Germany in World War II, that got me thinking. There was some undercurrent of occultism and paganism in some of the Nazi leadership that's perhaps been overstated by some of the more conspiratorial historians or more historical conspiracists. But do you see much evidence of, besides the Orthodox religion, any occultism or paganism, particularly focused on the Golden Horde and the Huns and the Mongols and everything? Is that much of an influence from what you've seen?
I think that thank you for your question. It's a very interesting and important one. I think that some scholars would describe the late Soviet era as an era of shallow Christianity or shallow faith. And that era of shallow faith has basically produced the current patriarch Kirill. It has also produced the current Russian president Putin. And I would say that the question of whether Putin is a genuine believer or not is sometimes it is completely dismissed by some people and argue that he doesn't believe, he's just instrumental. While others, and this is a school that I belong to, actually believe, pretty sure that he actually has some kind of genuine faith, but it's this kind of shallow Christianity where he doesn't know the scripture. He couldn't develop any genuine theological arguments and so on. And there's a mix of a concoction of also magical thinking and shamanistic beliefs. I mean, there are a lot of reports about various sacred activities of Putin, and that he's go on meet shamans in the Altai, and has been on pilgrimages, shorter pilgrimages, when he had the opportunity to do so. So he definitely has some kind of religious faith, and there's definitely for instance, a shamanistic aspect of his beliefs. That is my argument, at least. That's what I would say. And religion. I mean, another aspect of this situation, which speaks to your question also, is that even though the people actually do believe, I don't think that the Russian leadership, for instance, are complete atheists, and that they only put up an act of trying to be Christians. They are Christians in their own way. They have shallow faith, but they are somehow believers. But they also use religion as the church, in relation to the church, instrumentally to give their actually corrupt regime a nicer facade, so to speak. So that's also an aspect of it. I don't know. I can't comment on your very interesting observation about the possibility of connections to even the Golden Horde and so on. I don't know, but I think this is what I can say about the question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for your contribution. As we're nearing the end of our hour, Katerina, Dr. Frey, would you like to say a few words? I see your comment in chat.
Oh,
please.
I was initially looking for information in connection with Dean Deutsch's second question about the interaction on the Ukrainian Greek Catholic side or Greek Orthodox side, and I found an article that I thought I might share, but I think now it's not particularly relevant to this conversation. I also put in the chat a picture of what I believe to be the cathedral everyone is talking about. I hope that's the right one. So no, but beyond that, I've just been listening and learning, and very grateful for the education and then the clarity with which you've taught us all this. So I'm going to hold off on my comment. I was going to show some pictures of Metropolitan Archbishop Boris Kujak visiting troops, but it really does not fall into this conversation at all.
Thank you. Thank you. We all know that this is one of the most burning subjects, especially since Moscow keeps insisting that acceptance of a Russian branch of Orthodox Church should be a condition for any kind of, I don't want to say peace deal, any kind of war outcomes. My question, my only and last question to Dr. Gustafsson is also about war outcome. Do you think that this generation of Moscow clergy would be able to repent? Or they have to be replaced by some kind of younger generation, which I'm answering my own question, may not happen for a long time?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. My hunch is that the church, the Moscow Patriarchate and the Russian Orthodox Church, is actually a very important potential factory for reproducing Putinism, and sort of after Putin is gone. And I believe so because I had a very enlightening conversation about this topic recently with a scholar called Cyril Hovoron. And the argument goes that the church is a very conservative organization and changes very relatively slowly. And there still is quite a lot of people in it today that comply with the current ideology. And even if Putin and his companions would disappear tomorrow, the church would still be there as a anchor for the system, so to speak. But speaking about Russia's future is very difficult, I think, and very, very hazardous, because there are so many factors that one has to take into account. The future is always difficult to make prognoses, but especially about the future, you might say. And what is very obvious when I speak to my colleagues who are economists and political scientists and historians at the agency, we discuss this regularly, and we tend to agree at the moment that the Russian model of society and economy is based on more and more on concept of mobilization, not just economic mobilization, but also patriotic mobilization, spiritual mobilization, where the church, of course, has a role, and everything is tied together with this Russian world ideology and the image of this satanic enemy that is the West. And I was going to say the United States, but given the situation, this rather confusing situation with the Trump administration's relations to the Putin administration, I'm not sure what is what anymore about that. But I think the Russian side might be confused as well. Who is the enemy? But they thrive on the war. They thrive. The mobilization model thrives on eternal war. They are preparing for seemingly a war that can't end, because if it ends, the system might actually start to fall apart, because there's so many things that economically, for instance, that is dependent on the war going on.
Thank you. It's a strange time we're living in, and it's good that Sweden joined NATO.
Yes, thank you. I agree.
We wish all the best to your country, to you personally, and we thank you for taking part in our podcast. This was very kind to share your professional expertise, and we love to listen from people all across the world on different issues related to this time of war. I will ask Dr. Shrey to say a few words to our viewers in Ukraine.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям
Героям
слава!
слава.